Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Dyer, and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, April the 26th. We are down to a dozen days in the 2024 legislative session, and there is so much still before lawmakers, including the long-awaited and long plan to help Coloradans with our high property taxes, which on average have made about a 40% jump. But many people are dealing with much higher property tax increases, as you all know. So let's talk about the legislature first and foremost with our panel this week. We have Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, along with Alton Dillard, media consultant and 9 News political analyst, and also former election spokesperson for the city and county of Denver. Chris Rourke is here as well, consultant with Rourke Media, and Ian Thomas Tafoya, a community leader who just had a birthday this week, so happy birthday to you. So the 83-page bill at the legislature is largely based on recommendations from the Property Tax Commission. State Senator Chris Hansen was served as the co-chairman of that commission, and he was quoted this week saying this is the most difficult math problem he's ever tried to solve. But Patty, he is confident that this will bring some relief.
Well, depending on how you do the math, you don't just need to be an expert in math at the legislature this year. You need to know all about social media. You need to know about AI. You need to know about the environment. You need to know about transgender issues. You need to know language. Chris will get into that a little bit. It is so complicated. Every day, multiple times a day, you hear of new things coming out of the legislature. So this bill, which is the response to HH going down in flames last November, is coming up pretty close to the end. 83 pages is a lot to parse, especially when there's so many ramifications. Essentially, you'd be able to take up to 10% off your property valuation when you're doing your property tax. Would be capped at $750,000. So it will affect people whose homes are less expensive more, which is great, except $750,000 is probably under the average in Denver right now. Everyone knows that property taxes have gone up. We all have to pay them if we're paying them in full by the end of April. And the math, where is the money going to come from if it gets cut? And then we have a 4% initiative to cap coming on the November ballot. So even if this passes, we could lose more.
Okay, Alton.
Yeah, there is a lot of math there. And when it comes to property taxes, of course, every little bit helps. But the initiative you're talking about, that's a wrinkle. Remember, Colorado is one of maybe 18 to 20 states or so that even allows a citizen initiative process. And we have a citizen legislature. So people say, okay, let the folks at the Dome do their thing. Then if we don't like it, we're going straight to the voters. And that's why, you're probably going to have to get out your magnifying glasses for this upcoming November ballot. And so I'm curious to see what effect that it's going to have on K-12 education, some of the fire districts and some of those. And then also the last reporting that I saw is that I'm not sure if any Republican support's been lined up or not. And so with the full supermajority in the House and the near supermajority in the Senate, is this going to be a true bipartisan thing, or is the Republican Party just going to say, we're just going to take it directly to the voters, and we think that if we just say, let's put this small number out there, it's going to pass. So keep an eye on this and November.
As both Patty and Alton have mentioned, we don't know where the backfilling money is coming from that's going to take care of those fire districts, going to take care of the school districts. Is it going to be Tabor? Because we've seen other bills coming forward that are pulling from Tabor. And clearly Democrats are not going to stop. They're really going after Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So that will be something interesting to watch. The other thing that's come up in this, last 2 weeks of this session, of course, it's a frenzy to get all the work done. But now we have the majority party that has come out with a list of words that are not to be used. The list is alien, illegal, illegal alien, undocumented alien, interloper, squatter, fresh off the boat. It's very interesting. I started looking up the words that are being banned, so to speak. Alien is a resident of a country who has not been naturalized. So in my book, this appears to be censorship. And I think that we need to be paying attention to how business is being conducted, how language is being restricted as lawmakers are making these policies.
Ian, your thoughts?
Well, 83 pages is a lot to try to dig through in the last 10 days of the legislature. I think this is setting us up for a battle that feels very similar to last year when they decided to send HH, which is We've had over 100 days to work on this issue, all of its session. And so it initially just sets up conflict to be like inherently baked in, which I think is unfortunate because I do think we have to figure out this complex fiscal issue that we're facing. I know many in the side of the party that I'm in talk a lot about how we have to find fixes for the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. We have so many needs in our community. I think I read there's something like $2 billion that's in there, and we're fighting sometimes over a half FTE at the Capitol as a result of this. I do have concerns about how it's going to be backfilled. If Tabor is the place to go. What I want to make clear in all my travels across the state of Colorado, many of the largest employers in rural Colorado are the governments. So whether it's a conservation district or a water district or a firefighter or a school, healthcare often and government are the two that are at the highest list. So what does that do as it cascades through the economy, I think is a really important. And I'll say that this rancorous back and forth between legislators, I see it on Twitter all the time. I could also raise up several Republicans who I think have really crossed the line.
Okay, it's both ways. 2 more weeks to go. All right, we'll see how that goes. Less than. Last week, we spoke about the recent spike in youth violence throughout the metro area, and we want to follow up because there was a meeting last Saturday organized by the Colorado Black Roundtable. Alton, it was so good to see you and a lot of others there speaking about how we can help these kids feel supported and protected and our community safer.
One of the things that jumped out at me was the true sort of take the air out of the room moment where the kids came up to speak. And I don't mean take the air out of the room as a negative, but one of the young men, you know, everyone was talking about, well, you know, what can we do? Well, reach out to us, help us. One of the young men said, we need mentorship within the home. That just brought everything to a whoa. People assume that because people have children means they know how to parent. We have traumatized kids who think that gun violence is the only answer to solve a lot of things. And the other thing I want to mention just briefly is the role of media in this. Now, having been around media all my life, I don't buy into the narrative that, especially in the Denver market, people are out just to portray communities of color in a negative light. But after that meeting, I did reach out to some of the community organizations who work in the youth nonviolent space and said, you know, this is relationship building. You've got to be the ones helping to tell your story or that narrative is going to get told for you.
Yeah, there was no member. Patty was there. There were some of us from PBS 12 there, but there were no other media representation at that meeting. It was a shame to see.
Well, there's another report that says that crime overall is down. In fact, murders fell in Denver 16.4%, but is still 37% higher than 2019 before the pandemic. And again, I hate to keep going back to the pandemic to blame everything upon, but the pandemic was extremely disruptive. I think we're still recovering from it. And it was extremely disruptive to youth with schools shutting down and the uncertainty of a future. I understand from the meeting that what came out is these kids want support in terms of moving on, moving forward with their lives, things like internships and jobs and productive things. One thing I learned as a parent early on with my kids, you can't just say, don't do this. You have to say, do this instead. And from what I heard from this meeting, there were a lot of opportunities of organizations coming forward and saying, we'll help you do this instead. So that's very encouraging.
Reaching out to the kids in the community.
Right.
It was good to see. There were a lot of opportunities for the summer.
Yes.
Yeah, Ian.
Well, yeah, this issue came up a lot when I was running for mayor, and I'll tell the same story. The summer of violence took place in the 90s when I was a child, and then they stepped in and funded a lot of programs, and I got opportunity. My first job was actually at the Museum of Nature and Science, and it was funded through a mayor's office program, and I got to do ropes course and management training, and I think it really kicked me off into the right path. And in my time as an educator, and I started my career as a teacher, what I've seen is trying to talk to youth and say, have you looked for a job at the Denver School or the Denver Performing Arts Center? Or your first job doesn't necessarily have to be at say, a McDonald's or a grocery store. So we need to talk about that opportunity. I agree with Alton when he's saying, parent education and all of that is incredibly important, especially when you talk about a generation often whose fathers were also incarcerated, and so then you don't have that kind of mentorship yourself. I've seen this with the American Indian Center where they have a fatherhood program. I think that's really important. I will say that what I see is that youth want opportunity, they need mental health, but guess what? All of those opportunities, internships, jobs require adults to also have jobs, and working with youth does not pay. And we have a growing crisis, an eviction crisis, so that's impacting parents and their ability to be at home. But it's also impacting ability for people to stay in a career they love, being a youth educator and saying, am I ever going to be able to buy a house if I'm a youth educator? I'm not sure.
What's so interesting is John Bailey, he wrote a piece that we just published online, which is an op-ed calling for a Safe City campaign this summer, pulling people together, getting the city to really work with all these organizations. And you saw a lot of them that were there. And they're doing really fascinating things which no one hears about. You had the kids stand up who were talking about some of the programs they're starting themselves, which are really fascinating. We'd covered the Hip Hop Summit, a brand new hip hop summit in town like 6 weeks ago, which one segment definitely knew about it, but the Colorado Black Roundtable hadn't heard about it. John Bailey is a good communicator. He sends emails, so there was no reason for the media not to be there. You had candidates there, both candidates for DA, candidates for CU Regents. You had Chief of Police, the Manager of Safety. You had people from Parks and Rec. There were a lot of people there talking about it and listening, and it was just too bad that more people weren't there who could share the stories.
Absolutely. It was a really good event and very positive, like you say. Things are moving forward, hopefully, for those kids. Chris, for someone who goes back and forth to Gunnison like you do, let's talk about the closure of US 50 Bridge over the Blue Mesa Reservoir. This is a big deal. This is a big deal.
It is a big deal. But when I talk to friends over here on this side of the mountain, you know, it's sort of a curious sort of situation. Oh, wow, did that happen? And what I want to try to do is really explain the impact of this. It's almost similar to if Interstate 25 were shut down between Denver and Colorado Springs. There is a huge artery of commerce between Gunnison and Montrose. And people go from Gunnison to Montrose for medical treatment. They go for shopping. I mean, there are 2 grocery stores and a Walmart in Gunnison. You know, every once in a while people want to go to Target in Montrose, okay? That's a lighter look at this. But what has happened with this bridge with a 3-inch crack is it has completely shut off traffic. Now, they have opened up what is known as the Lake City Cutoff. And everybody has described it as a dirt road. It's like, you know, the 2 tire tracks through the sagebrush roads? It's kind of like that. The county has gone ahead and laid gravel, from what I understand. They've opened it up for local traffic. So going from Gunnison, you have to dip down to a little town called Powderhorn and take this gravel road through the sagebrush down, dipping down. It takes an extra hour. So, and it's for local traffic only. So that's what they've done.
And is that the 2 times a day they'll lead people on this?
They're doing it
there's
2 times a
pace car
day.
yeah.
Now, on top of this comes right after 3 years of construction on what's known as the Little Blue Canyon. 3 years of traffic delays and people in Gunnison and Montrose learning how to navigate that. Now we have this on top of it. The Little Blue Canyon project is close to conclusion, which everybody was going to celebrate. Now we have this.
And Axios reported this week that there are 32 bridges that are considered in poor condition in our state. This story this week of this bridge, Ian, is bringing up a much bigger issue, not just potholes that a lot of people are complaining about right now.
People know that I sued over I-70, okay? I took 50% of the state's bridge enterprise funds for more than 30 years. So every time anybody goes and does that, it's $2 billion for 2 miles. And so when I was traveling across the state to fight the I-70 expansion through my community, I was saying this is taking from us fixing our bridges in rural Colorado, and it's absolutely true. Highway 50, super important if you're trying to travel over there, and I had a staffer who lives in Gunnison, and what I can tell you is that we've been trying to work with CDOT actually to talk about public transportation there, because when you look at the Bustang network, there actually isn't a connection between Montrose and Gunnison. So if you need to get to, say, Pueblo, and you live in Montrose, you have to go all the way around to Denver and down, and so that's 7 hours. In regards to our infrastructure, absolutely our infrastructure is aging. It's why we fought for the Build Back Better and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It is not just this, it is our wastewater, ask the engineers, it's our drinking water. layer upon layer of infrastructure was not invested in for almost a century. And so now we're here trying to get it done. And I am sorry for the communities, because even just traveling there, whether we're doing the Blue Canyon, was challenging. This is no different than what happened after the fires for Glenwood Canyon. It's going to impact small businesses. It's going to impact tax base. It's going to have a huge implications, more than just people being able to shop at Target.
Patty.
Well, you shouldn't have to have a cargo ship hit the bridge to realize they are so critical to so many people around the country, but especially in this part of the country where you have so few options. I love it that kids have to take a boat to school across Blue Mesa now, which really puts things in perspective. You could probably do a ferry nonstop for all the people who can't travel on their normal paths. So we do need an assessment, and a serious assessment of the infrastructure across the state, not just the urban areas, which get the most attention, but these rural areas where if you get something cut off, it's a 6-hour detour, it's a 7-hour detour. We've seen it happen with Berthoud Pass. We hear it happen all the time, and it shuts down parts of the state that cannot afford to lose that.
Do you think, does anyone think, or is there time left for any kind of legislation to help? We hear that there's the $10 million freed up to the state, but anything to help this part or to be more focused on our infrastructure?
Well, one other thing that's come up in more recent reporting is that they have found additional cracks. So they're really back to almost square one to try as far as figuring out a solution. But as I always bring up, you can turn a bill from introduction to the governor's desk in 72 hours, the way Colorado's legislature is set up. So, but again, we also want to, complain about taxes, and having lived in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where the roads are as smooth as this table, you get what you pay for.
I will say, though, that Senate Bill 260 passed a few years ago. It was the largest bill in state history, more than $5 billion. And a lot of people don't know that their budget appropriation process is actually determined on their own with their county commissioners. That was just a couple months ago. If anybody got the money, it's CDOT.
You bring that up, though, can the state legislature do anything? I question whether the Western Slope is 11% of the population and is less represented at the Capitol than the Front Range. Will they take this seriously enough to try to get legislation through? It would benefit the entire state.
Do they have time? I mean, that's the other thing,
Yeah.
with all the other issues on the table.
Well, each month, the CDOT has a commission meeting that you can tune in online, you can testify. It's, I think, the third Thursday of the month. So I would encourage people from these communities, or if you believe in supporting these infrastructure issues, to get involved with the CDOT commission. We actually, I was there on the day they were talking about $1.8 billion in their budget a few months ago. We were the only ones in the room.
Really? Okay. All right. Thanks. Well, we just had Earth Day this week, and there have been a lot of stories regarding environment and water and combating climate change that have made headlines. And Ian, you were in Washington this week on Capitol Hill and in the White House for a water summit. And bring us up to date.
Biden is on a roadshow, and his people all across the country this week announcing clean water investments, solar for all. I mean, it is an unbelievable package that I think, again, is really needed. It's the largest investment in global history towards the environment and for our infrastructure. And so I just really want to say that we need people to get involved, because infrastructure needs to be built by, for, with, and for your community. What does that mean? Women and minority-owned business goals. That means making sure that asphalt and concrete facilities are compliant, so we're not hurting communities nearby. It means best value metrics for people who are trying to get labor jobs. There's community benefits agreements and so much more. And to be at the White House, last year I was invited to the White House for the signing of an executive order on environmental justice for Earth Day. So 2 years in a row, I don't know if I'm ever gonna be able to top that.
Maybe. Patty.
Well, and ironically, while he was at the White House on Earth Day, we had a group of businesses, trade associations and businesses, representing apartments, construction, filing a lawsuit against both Denver and the state, talking about how the standards they want them to meet in construction and to move away from natural gas are going to just cost too much, and they want to go back to the federal standards. But so you've got a lawsuit against both Denver and the state, and meanwhile you've got legislators that are also pushing now for a new state climate office too. So we have a lot of discussions that have to be had in this state, And people have to pay attention. When you poll, everyone says we are so concerned about climate change. But after Earth Day, who goes out and pays attention?
When I worked for Senator Campbell, he was one of the prime co-sponsors of the bill that created AmeriCorps. So it was also heartening for me to see the interest in a climate corps, because also back to what we were talking about as far as our youth, our kids need to go get some calluses on those hands. It gets them prepared for life. So I was really heartened to see that. And then briefly on the clean water issue, we're spoiled here. We get highest ratings for tap water all throughout the metro area and even around the state. And if we've all traveled to places where the water tastes like it came out of a swimming pool. So we're spoiled there. And then the other thing I always remind people is we also need to lose the mindset that environment is something that stops at the city limits.
Well, talking about water, one thing that I've seen in the news is the purchase of the Shoshone water rights on the Colorado River by the Colorado River District from XL. They reached a deal back in December, and now they need to come up with about $99 million to pay for it. The River District's put forth $20 million. But now local municipalities and water districts are coming forward just this week and pledging money towards this deal. City of Grand Junction's come forth with $1 million. Overall, these local districts have come up with $8 million to contribute. There's money that's supposedly going to come from the feds, going to come from the state. And why this is important is this is an environmental water right, because in this deal, the Colorado River District would lease water back to XL Energy, that has the Shoshone power plant that does hydroelectric for 1.6 million customers, and that water stays in the river. It prevents somebody from buying that water right and drawing off the Colorado River, impacting flows downstream. There are endangered fish near Grand Junction, 4 different species, and one of them is the humpback chub. So write that one down. So anyway, this is a great environmental move. It's great to keep water on the western slope, and we'll see how this deal goes forward.
Okay, very good. Now it is time for us to go down the line and talk about some of the highs and the lows of the week. This has been a busy week. So Patty, let's start with the low point so we can end on a good note.
Well, there was an event yesterday in Montgomery, Alabama, commemorating truly one of the low points in Colorado history. The lynching of 15-year-old Preston Porter Jr. in November 1900 outside Lyman. Last documented lynching, a horrifying story. He had been arrested and imprisoned in Denver. He was let loose. A mob took him over. There's a memorial spot at 13th and Larimer where you can see what happened to Preston Porter Jr., but soil from where he was lynched outside Lyman was taken to the Legacy Memorial in Alabama, and it's a way to remember the almost 6,500 Americans who were lynched.
Wow, okay.
Wow, mine's a lighter, it's a little political though. My negative are candidates who try to petition onto ballots and come up short. Colorado by no means has any kind of draconian signature requirements, and I understand people are going to play the grassroots card and, well, I couldn't, do a bunch of paid circulators. All it takes, get an iPad, get a voter list from your county clerk, secretary of state, do your own on-the-spot QC. Don't just assume people know what district they live in. Don't assume that they are registered. You can confirm that on the spot. So I think in a state as easy as it is to get on the ballot, in Colorado, that's unacceptable.
Yeah.
My low of the week is Jeff Davis with Colorado Parks and Wildlife rejecting 3 counties' request to take lethal action against 2 wolves that have been depredating livestock. The reason he gave is these 2 wolves are participating in reproduction right now. And it just really is discouraging to Colorado ranchers to get that kind of response from CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And now we're going to start to see what happens as wolves have crossed the Continental Divide. They are in the West Boulder County watershed in Larimer County. So we'll see once wolves are on the Front Range how that goes.
Ian.
I also am frustrated with the state of Colorado, so I'm going to take a little run at the Colorado Energy Office, whom showed up to testify against 1339 related to the Environmental Justice Act that I helped pass, and I chaired the EJ task force. They joined forces with Suncor to say it's okay to have a pay-to-pollute fund instead of actually having to reduce emissions in our community. I say CEOs for CEOs, and I'm for people over polluters.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about something positive. Patty, let's start with you.
There was a class this week for people who've come from West Africa who don't really understand culturally our food. They don't know that greens are to eat. And there was a cooking class to teach them how to use this donated food. Small individual efforts that help people get along.
Okay. All right.
My shout out is to Jamal Murray, not for just hitting the game-winning buzzer beater, but the fact that he pretty much stunk until then. But watching his teammates picking him up, and people say these guys get paid millions of dollars to play a game. You could tell, especially when he was struggling, how much he cared about, still putting the team on his back and not being afraid to take that big shot.
Chris.
That's great. Well, I got to facilitate a conversation at the Tattered Cover on Colfax this week on censorship. And the author of the book was James LaRue, who at his highest levels of service with, as a public librarian, worked with the American Library Association. And he is a staunch advocate of defending keeping books and materials, etc., in libraries to facilitate conversations and not censor them because they might be perceived as offensive.
I'm going to close with something else environment related. I've been on here talking about the DPS bond that is taking place, nearly $1 billion, and I've been saying people have not been participating. Last week, the Earth Rangers, who are elementary school students, went to every single one of the open public meetings asking for them to live up to the DPS climate initiative. We need to take one out of the books of these kids that you just don't do it on Earth Day. You got to do it every day. And we got to be looking for these ways to leverage the resources we have to tackle more than one crisis at a time.
All right, good. I'm going to talk about school kids too, because my positive of the week is the decision by the Colorado High School Sports Association to make girls flag football a sanctioned sport. Since CHASA started out this as a pilot program in 2022, participation among teenage girls has jumped 161% in Colorado. Learning to work as a team player is so important for kids and adults. For girls, though, I think there's something about sports that gives you a boost in confidence. So I appreciate seeing this stamp of approval for a fun and growing sport in our state. Thank you, panel, for joining us this week. We appreciate all of your conversation. Thank you for watching and listening at home or at the podcast or on your laptop or on TV. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.
PBS 12 believes in the power of original, local programming. Help us bring more shows, like the one you just watched, by donating at pbs12.org/program support today.